Welcome, everyone. I'm Dan Roth. I'm the executive editor of LinkedIn. Thrilled to have Adam Braun here. And we're going to, before we get into everything, want to just give a reminder about what we're all doing here, what the point of this series is. This is the LinkedIn Speaker Series. The whole idea is to bring in people who can inform and inspire the LinkedIn and outside world, and remind people about how to be better at what they do, how to be more productive, and to go after the things that achieve the things they want to achieve. Rochelle Diamond is the mastermind of this. She's sitting somewhere around here. Rochelle, there she is, okay. If you want to see who she's brought in the past, who we have planned for the future, to watch old events and to give ideas about who else you'd like to see, go to go/speaker series. And if you're tuning in from the Ustream, outside of LinkedIn, we have a public-facing site. It's speakers.linkedin.com. You can watch all the past speaker series and learn a lot. Quick reminder to everyone else, you can share this with your networks. Obviously, share it on LinkedIn. Everyone take pictures, put that up. Rich media sharing, very available. Hashtag is #InSpeaker for the series, and Adam Braun is @AdamBraun for Adam. OK, so on to the event today. That's all the housekeeping. We're very fortunate to have Adam Braun with us here. I just finished his book. Is it bad to say that it was yesterday? But I finished.
No,
I've been reading it for a week every day, digesting a little bit, going home and telling my wife, "You won't believe this. You can't believe this story." Adam runs Pencils of Promise. This is, I was going to say, a not-for-profit or a nonprofit, but Adam has coined a whole new term for it, which is a for-purpose entity. His idea is that not-for-profit is a negative. It is, when you think about the non, it belittles the idea. You should be going after something that is for purpose, and that's what his organization does. They've built roughly 226 schools, not roughly, exactly, 226 schools?
Today it's probably in maybe one or two higher than that.
All right, 228-ish
Yeah.
schools around the world. And this year we'll do roughly $6 million in revenue. And Adam doesn't just build the schools, and the organization doesn't just build the schools. They staff them. They work with local governments about how to make sure that they are being run properly. They come up with the curriculum. They make sure the kids are dressed well and that have supplies and that they get to school safely. The other important part is that they also get the local community involved. The community builds the schools. They might help fund the schools. They are fully bought in to the idea of the school, and they feel like they are owners of it as well. And that's one of the ways that this really distinguishes itself from other for-purpose entities that try to do the same thing. Adam's path, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about, was very clear-cut. He grew up in Greenwich, was off to an Ivy League school. Bain, you could have imagined him going to a hedge fund and then maybe starting his own company. Right now, we should probably be all seeing him tooling around in a Tesla or 3 around the outside the office, which is fine, by the way. That's great. We'll all take that. But he chose a different path for himself. Did the Ivy League, went to Bain, and then realized that he had a different purpose. And school by school, building school by school, person by person, donor by donor, and really getting people on an individual level to commit to his dream. He built this incredible organization. So a very long introduction, Adam. It's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's kick this off. I'd like to talk to you about the idea of, excuse me, before we even start with the questions, we have a tradition at LinkedIn.
OK.
When new employees start, we ask them to do 2 things. You're not a new employee, but you're new to LinkedIn. So number 1 is tell us something that's not on your profile. And number 2 is, do you have a special talent? And if so, would you mind demonstrating to us what that talent is?
So the thing that's not on my profile is that I have older brother, younger sister, but I have 2 other brothers that my family took in, now it's almost 14 years, from Mozambique. And so I'm an uncle to my 2 adopted brothers, but they're my brothers. They're part of my family. But something that not a lot of people know about me, and it's certainly not on my profile.
And what are their names?
Sam and Cornelio.
Great.
Yeah. And then my distinct talent is that I can play, I don't know if it's Hot Cross Bun or 3 Blind Mice, but that song. Yeah, right, it's both. Thank you. Okay. God.
It's a double talent. That's great.
So I can play it on my hand by snapping with different fingers.
Let's hear it.
All right.
That is. If anyone has to leave now, that's the highlight. It is not going to get any, not going to top
I'm
that.
not very talented. If that's the best
That's great. That, by the way, is how Adam raises all the money for the schools. Donors just flip over that. In your book, you talk about this kind of gnawing sense that you had to do something big. You started with your dad, your family, but really your dad saying, look, the Brauns do things differently. And that they stand apart. There are two aha moments that you talk about. Number one is where you came up with the idea for the pencil, the importance of the pencil. And then two is the time when you were at the Philharmonic and you realized something. Can you walk the crowd through those two moments?
Sure. So let's see. The first thing you referenced was just a simple phrase my dad told us every night before we went to sleep. He said this to my brother and my sister and I. He would just, right before we go to bed, he'd say, hey, remember, Brauns are different. And eventually they started to use it to justify all the stuff that we wanted, that all the other kids got, and we didn't. And so, my friends had Nintendo or Sega, and I really wanted to play video games, and we weren't allowed to have video games. I say, why? I say, oh, well, because Brauns are different. So for a while, we really didn't like this phrase. But eventually he used it, and I think my mom sometimes, when my dad really pushed it on us, to kind of justify the expectation that we were supposed to live outside of the norms that everyone else was expected to abide by. And so if a kid was being bullied or someone said a racial phrase, usually as a kid you want to conform, you don't want to get picked on. But if we kind of stood up and said, don't say that, and then we came home and the teacher might call my parents, my dad would come over and say, you know why you did that, right? I say, why? I say, because Brauns are different. And so over time, it wasn't the sense that we were better or superior than anybody. It was just that you were different. And so, as I found myself going down what was a very traditional path, and one that in my mind as a kid was exactly what I wanted. I wanted to make as much money as possible. I grew up as a basketball player. Some of my friends lived in the projects. Other friends of mine lived in these mansions backcountry. And my dad was a dentist. My mom was an orthodontist. So we weren't, in the position that my friends whose parents ran hedge funds were in. But we certainly weren't in the projects. And I looked at the big houses and I thought, I want that. And so I pursued that path, but it didn't live up to that expectation that I was somehow going to be different. And so when I was 21, I went on a program called Semester at Sea. On Semester at Sea, it's a full chapter within the book, but my ship got struck by a 60-foot rogue wave about 800 miles from land, and I had a certain death experience that's very graphically detailed in there, and just changed the way that I thought about everything, because I was sure at one point that my life was going to perish in the next hour. And I had a habit of asking one kid in each country that we went through as the voyage continued, this simple question: what do you want most in the world? And I thought they'd give the answers that I wanted as a kid, some material possession, a house, a car, or something. And a boy who was begging on the streets of India was the one child that I asked, and his answer was a pencil. Hence the name of our organization, the name of the book. I gave him my pencil, he lit up, and I'm naturally pretty introverted. I was very uncomfortable starting conversations with new people, and yet I became obsessed with backpacking. So I would just get a one-way flight with the little money that I had saved to some part of the world, and I would travel for months on end through Central and South America or Asia or somewhere else. And because I was introverted, there were times where literally I didn't talk to anyone for a week plus.
So that when you were talking to the children and you would say, what is it the one thing you want? That was just during that semester at sea?
That was just semester at sea.
That was
really.
Okay.
That was, in semester at sea when you're in college, you kind of had this one shtick you're going to do per country. You're going to get a beer bottle. You're going to get a funky hat. You're going to take a photo with a Beanie Baby in front of a monument. Somebody definitely did that here. Yeah, there it is.
That's fun.
So my thing was that one question. As I backpacked more post-semester at sea and that summer and the subsequent year, I actually asked that question of parents all the time, because I would give a pencil and they fostered conversation. So the kid would speak to me, and then the parents would come over, and I'd ask the parents, what do you want most in the world, if you could have anything? And it wasn't a new fishing net, it wasn't less corrupt government, it was always better education for my child. So I became really impassioned around this topic. And then I moved to New York, and I started working at Bain. And about a year into my time at Bain, I kind of picked my head up one day, and I realized that I was really only living in service of myself. And my whole life was centered around work life and social life. And the kind of extracurriculars that we had in high school and college, for some reason, just went away. And my grandmother was turning 80, and she's a Holocaust survivor. And I wanted to find a way to honor her that was more meaningful than just golf clubs or something like that. And I had spent so much time in these communities in the developing world. I knew how low the costs were. I knew how to work with the individuals. I knew how to empower local leadership. And so I got this idea to try and start an organization, initially with $25, ask for donations instead of birthday presents, and try and build one school to honor her. And the aha moment happened at the Philharmonic Symphony. I'd never been to the symphony. A colleague of mine at Bain got 6 tickets for all of us junior analysts, and at one point everyone left the stage and there was a single piano player that came out and he just started crushing the keys and everyone was enraptured by this guy. And I remember sitting there looking at him and thinking, I just want to feel that passionate about anything. However he feels about this piano, that's what I want. Then I would be really alive. And the name Pencils of Promise came into my head. It felt like a bolt of lightning. And I went home, I wrote the charter for the organization that night. I texted my parents. I was like, everything's changed. I'm coming home tomorrow. Sorry, but I got this crazy idea I got to tell you about. And I'd like taken this safe path, and both my parents came from nothing, so they were reluctant at first to tell me that I should go do it. But that was the genesis of everything.
And why not? You have this. A lot of people have these passionate moments. There are things that they care deeply about. But they also worry about paying the bills. They are on a career path. They try to play it safe.
Yeah.
You tried that for a little bit, and then you said you kind of pushed Bain aside and went fully into this. What's your recommendation for people who have? Is that the right path? Is that the path for everyone? What do you think?
I would say not a hard no, but a soft no. So in my case, it's not actually like I just got this idea and then I left behind my entire kind of safe path. So I stuck a very kind of proverbial foot in the water and waded in slowly. So Bain has what they call an externship program. You can work for somebody else for 6 months, usually hedge funds or private equity or portfolio companies, and then you come back. And this is late 2008. The economy was brutal here. Everyone was losing their jobs. So Bain sat down my full class and said, look, if any of you want to leave for 9 months, that's okay by us because they don't pay you when you go on the externship. And so I used the 9 months to launch Pencils of Promise. So I stepped away from my job, but I had a safety net to come back to. I had my job waiting at the end of those 9 months. And when I came back and tried to work on the clients that I was being assigned to, by that time, the organization, we already had, we were on our 2nd school, which felt like an enormous accomplishment back then. And it was kind of an incremental set of steps. And so my advice to people is always to first get out of your comfort zone. In my case, that was semester at sea. Leaving, my identity was a basketball player at Braun University by the time I was a sophomore. Suddenly, by the time I got back my senior year, anyone that knew me on campus referred to me as the Cambodia guy, because I was obsessed with this organization called the Cambodian Children's Fund that I had come across while traveling. And I left the basketball team to go on semester at sea and came back and was so immersed in this organization. And so I spent 4 years from 21 to essentially 25 before launching Pencils of Promise, just trying to really learn and study the space and see how other great leaders were defining organizations, what real sustainability looked like, living with communities, to kind of understand what it meant to pursue this craft. And I still didn't leave my job immediately. It was kind of a calculated step until the point where I came back to Bain in March of 2010. I called in sick for 2 straight weeks. And they were like, you've never had a sick day in 2 weeks? Something's up here. And my staff manager called me and he was like, look, I know you're working on Pencils of Promise and you need to make a choice here. And that day I went home and there's a street artist named De La Vega, who some people here might know. He used to have like a museum in the East Village on St. Mark's. And I just moved into an apartment on 10th between 1st and 2nd. And as I walked down the street, right on my garbage, cardboard garbage outside, was graffitied his main phrase that clearly he had written that said, become your dream. And I'd just been told, like, you gotta decide. So I cut it out and I decided that I was gonna pursue Pencils of Promise full-time at that point, and that one day that would go in the office. And now if you come into our office, that's the first thing you see framed right when usually I meet with people, is that piece of garbage.
Serendipity plays as a piece of garbage. serendipity plays such a big role in how you've built this and how you've staffed it. You do have this kind of Bain, and I want to get to the organization in a second, but you do have this Bain background of this kind of rigidity and thinking about processes, and you brought someone in during her externship and asked her to put all these processes in place. And yet and so much of the book is you go somewhere and you get a little Wi-Fi slip and someone's name is on it and you decide that's the person you're going to hire. Or which happened. You meet someone you go to Oklahoma State, you talk at a function and someone comes and talks to you afterwards, and that's another person who becomes the biggest fundraiser for you. How do you balance those two things of focusing so much on this process and also being open to accepting what fate brings you?
It's a great question. I've never been asked that. And I think that it's an accurate assessment. Anyone who knows me well or knows our team and our staff, that's kind of almost one of the defining characteristics of the organization, is that we're both led so heavily by heart, and yet it's completely tempered by an emphasis on head. You know, like this counterbalance of how do you pursue something with pure intuition and then ensure that it's successfully executed by using logic and rationale. And it's something that I think I personally sometimes struggle with. And truthfully, that's one thing that I've come to just be self-aware around. I mean, there's a lot in the book that talks about my mistakes, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that I think I realized very quickly within a year or two was that I'm the type where I try to read the signs around me. I look for indicators from the world that help guide me in the direction that I feel like I'm meant to be here for. I mean, I think a lot about, and I talk a lot about purpose. There's nothing more powerful than finding a sense of purpose and then pursuing it. And so I'm constantly evaluating, is this something that's grounded in purpose-based decision making? And then once I'm confident in it, the truth is you need a tremendous amount of business acumen to bring that idea to life. And that's where I think there's a big disconnect in the nonprofit space, as people are pursuing passion, but they rarely back it up with the business acumen that's needed to ensure execution, which is grounded in results and data. Like, we can put up as many beautiful photos as we want, but unless we have strong data that demonstrates that literacy rates are increasing in our students and in their lives and within our schools, then this work is kind of all for naught. And so the way that I've tried to think about it is, on a personal level, I'm guided by the more purpose type of thinking. But the organization cannot be reliant on that. The organization itself, which I see as very separate from me, ideas, I don't think they belong to people. I think they kind of come through people, and then your job is to be, to live with the highest integrity to the authenticity of the idea's origin. And so that's where the rationale and the head part comes in, and that's where we have a phenomenal staff.
It must be tough, though, I would think, with your staff. They watch how you work, they've read your book, and they come with these great ideas. They must have, and they join you because they have a sense of purpose. So how do you temper them when they come and say, I have the most amazing dream, and I saw a piece of garbage on the street, and so therefore I think we need to do X, Y, and Z?
So usually it's more the opposite. It's usually me, and Melanie and Natalie are probably laughing and smiling because they've seen a lot of this. I usually come in with like a new idea every couple days. And the organization, I think, suffered early on because I was so committed to the frequency of new ideas. And for you to be really successful in this work, you actually have to find a focus, plan around it, and go execute on it over a lengthy period of time. And I'd have this idea, and a month later, I think there was a better idea. And so I would say, as an organization, we've now fostered a culture that celebrates debate around whether an idea is valid or not. And so it's not just myself, but everybody comes in with new ideas all the time. But I think part of just maturation as an individual, and more importantly, maturation as an organization, leads to you saying, all right, where do we want to be 3 years from now? What's it going to take to do that? And if these ideas don't directly contribute to us getting there, then we have to say no. And at this point, I would say 80 to 90% of my ideas get shot down within the first day.
Is that true? Yeah.
But that's a good thing. That's a really good thing for the well-being of the organization.
That's great. Talk a little bit about the organization. What is it that you, how has it changed since you had that initial charter, since you went home after the Philharmonic and said, here's what we're about? What were some of the assumptions that you made about what Pencils of Promise would look like versus now looking back and saying, now at a mature stage, realizing what it takes to keep educating kids?
Yeah, well, one thing is we're just an infinitely better organization at what we do. You know, if you think about it in terms of the way that you guys work on things here, the prototype of LinkedIn and its first iteration is a joke compared to the abilities that you guys have now to execute on the original mission and vision of the organization. So in our case, the original idea was build one school, honor my grandmother, try and impact one community. Now we break ground on a new school every 90 hours. And what we realized once we started to evaluate the data was that the school structure was really just kind of the tip of the sword. That was the beginning of the relationship with the community, that it was essential for us to have community co-investment. And so we started with 10 to 20% of the contribution has to come from the community itself. Now it's almost always 20% or more. And they make it up in materials and labor, so they physically help build the school for their community's children. But when we looked at, again, data, we realized that the single most important lever in the well-being of that child was actually the teacher, not just the physical structure. And so we launched a second program, which is now going to be a big focus for us, which is teacher training. So there's an entire part of our organization that's exclusively around teacher training, nothing to do with the infrastructure. We also looked and we saw that our kids were progressing really well through our primary schools, but there were huge dropout rates when they went over to secondary. And in particular, that affects girls in rural environments. And so we developed a scholarship program. That, again, is a separate component of the organization, but we've seen amazing data and amazing results around the cohesion of those three things, as well as what we call WASH. It's water and sanitation and health education. And then last component, which I could talk about for hours, that is what we're calling our innovation pilots. And so it's introducing new teaching methodologies and, even more importantly, new technology into the classroom. So in May, 3 of our schools in Ghana, every kid got an e-reader. We just partnered with Sugata Mitra, who won the TED Prize in 2013, to expand his idea around self-organized learning environments. And in the fall, we'll roll those out in some of our schools as well. And there's a whole host of stuff that we're doing on that side. So what started with build a school is now much more focused on create a sustainable opportunity for a child in the developing world, in a rural environment, to get access to a great education.
Is that the motto of the organization? Is that the way everyone thinks internally? Is everyone holistically about the kid?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the fundamental belief that founded the organization is that every single child, regardless of age, status, or location, should have access to quality education. And our commitment is to do whatever it takes to help enable that world in the most meaningful way that we can. And so it started as a 24, 25-year-old, like, oh, maybe we can build one school.
Right.
And now that vision continues to evolve to include teacher training and all the other components that I was mentioning.
You love being on the road. You talk a lot. It is clear that the passion that you have for being out there and for sleeping on hard beds and wearing a backpack and living with random families.
I love being on the road internationally. I like being in the communities. I like, let me get a motorbike and a backpack and ride as far as I can and just stop somewhere in some village in the middle of nowhere, and I'm very happy. Being on the road domestically, comfortable hotels and all that stuff, and TSA regulations, that is brutal. I can't stand that. So it's kind of funny.
All right, so you're human. And you talk in the book about you're on the beach and someone approaches you and says, hey, will you come and basically I want to learn English so I can teach my kids English. Yeah. And then you live with this guy for a couple of days. You sleep next to him. You read the Bible.
Right. It's a tape recorder.
And a tape recorder, and he's wearing his headphones. Yeah. So this is a passion. The passion comes through you when you're writing those chapters. But at this point, you are leading a $6 million in revenue organization. You are in a leadership role. How do you balance the idea of either being a CEO, being behind a desk, or having to go ask people for money, versus what started you in the first place, which was this passion to be in these communities and to see the growth?
It's another really good question. I mean, it's something that I not only think about a lot, I just experience it. It's not just this mental idea, but I have to reconcile it with decision making and how I spend my time throughout the day. And I think a big part of the decision making that goes into that kind of conflicting set of preferences is just an understanding of whether you're going to be adherent to self-interest or organizational well-being. and that those are often in direct conflict. And so, I didn't start this at all to ever ask anyone else for money. I definitely didn't start it to manage a big staff or a board or set a budget and then go pursue that budget. I did it because I like being in the communities and I wanted to find a way to work on education with those kids. But at the end of the day, if you want to accomplish that mission, you have to understand whether you're in a junior position in a company or whether you're in a position of leadership, that your role is going to evolve and that the single best thing that you can do is find where you are uniquely extraordinary. The one thing or two things that make you most come alive and that you can add the most value for the long-term well-being of that company, and then focus on being exceptional at that and constantly find what your pain points are, what you're not great at, and invest a ton of time and effort in finding great quality people and training them to take on all of your responsibilities and do it better than you ever could. And so at the beginning, I was the de facto head of social media. I was the head of marketing. I was the head of, I did all of those jobs. But over the years, one by one, we've been able to find really great people who are much better at those job titles and functions than I could ever be. They're just better at it. Much better. And so when I try to think about that counterbalance, I focus on what I can do uniquely, and that's the founder part. Nobody else can kind of tell the story of how we began. And so I try and spend as much of my time on the founder role and find extraordinary people that can be empowered to take on everything else. And ideally, the organization then is something that lives beyond any one individual, which is super important to myself and everyone else that's involved. It's got to be bigger than any one board member, any contributor, or even a founder or a CEO.
So that it can survive you, so that it can go on.
Yeah, the dream is that years from now, Pencils of Promise is impacting the world, and I'm like cheering it on the way their parent. I now get why parents cry when their kid goes to college. I actually understand that for the first time, because that notion of this thing isn't going to be in your hands and with you all the time, but how proud you are of its existence in the world separate from you is something that my parents tell me I'm an idiot for saying that I have any like actual true empathy for that experience, but I think that it's kind of close.
That's great. It's funny you would talk about the idea of doing things, figuring out what you do well and really emphasizing it, because a part of what you talk about in the book, and I think a lot of us can empathize with this, is the idea of figuring out what you're bad at and also learning how to do that better. And there's a whole schools of thought about whether you should ditch the things that you're bad at and just focus on what you're good at. But one of the things that you weren't good at was asking for money.
Right.
You could throw phenomenal parties and get people to come.
Yeah.
But individual, one-on-one, asking people, give me $250,000 a year for 3 years.
Even $100. All.
Oh, really? It was down to that level.
I did not make a single financial ask of anyone in the first 3.5 years of our organization.
Wow.
No one will tell you, Adam asked me for $500 outright. I would present an opportunity, I'd try and articulate a vision, and then I'd say, love for you to get involved, and then put it in their hands.
So, but why not delegate that to someone else if that's not your strength?
Yeah.
And what do you think about the idea of people going after their strengths or realizing what they're weak at and having someone else do that part?
Yeah.
Why not? Why didn't you give that to you come in, you deliver the message, and then someone you work with then makes the big ask?
So in the early days, meaning the first probably 2-3 years, the main reason that I did not do that is because I could not, at that point in time, justify taking money out of the organization and into anything that wasn't almost directly related to impact. And so, we were so lean, we continue to be extremely lean now, but the idea of paying somebody full-time just to generate money wasn't something that I was really into, because I felt like every dollar that we get needs to go directly into schools and into students. And as part of my function, and not only overseeing that, well-being of the impact, I would also take on the fundraising. Then we hired somebody, and unfortunately, they didn't work out. And it was just not a great hire on my behalf, but I learned way more from that hire than I have from probably any other in my career. And after a period of time, probably around 2011, 2012, we transitioned, we made a separate hire. And now, fortunately, we're at a size and a well-being where we have a development department. There's 2 or 3 people that work specifically on the fundraising capacity. But I think a lot of times when you secretly know that you're really not good at something, we just naturally avoid doing it.
Right.
and we don't like to talk about it, and we have this perception that if something's going well, that just ride that good wave and hope that this extreme weakness, this immense vulnerability is just never going to surface. And I think the people that go too long with that mentality end up having very bad crashes. They fall on their face very prominently often. And so that's, for those that haven't read the book, it's framed around 30 short chapters, and every chapter is titled with a mantra. And the mantras are the guiding steps to both experience, I think, success and significance. And so the chapter that talks about that experience is called Vulnerability is Vital. And I had this board of directors of really impressive people that ran huge businesses. And I think at the time I was maybe 27 or 28. And I felt like I could never go in front of them and say, hey, I'm actually terrible at raising money, asking for money, and if we don't do something fast about it, we're not going to be able to continue growing. That was like a petrifying notion for me, because that's the last thing you want to do in front of the people who have most invested in you, is to say, actually, I'm really bad at this important thing. And so at a board meeting, I just decided to lay it all out there and be completely vulnerable and see what happens. And it was the opposite of what I expected. They said, we're glad that we know this. We now need to deeply invest in you. It's important for the organization to get to the next level. So they ended up getting me into a course at Harvard that really just exclusively taught how to fundraise. And then it goes through making my first ask, which...
you almost got there.
Yeah. I kind of chickened out at the end. But the key was to take ego out of it, which I just wouldn't have known unless I went through the kind of academic experience where somebody said, look, the reason you're uncomfortable asking is because you feel like you're asking for yourself. But you're not. You're asking for the students and these communities that you're trying to support. This has nothing to do with you. You're just the conduit through which they will be supported. And so when you ask, think of one of those little girls that you know so well. You're asking on behalf of her, not on behalf of you. And that slight mental and emotional shift changed the feeling from this is an obligation to now this is an honor that I get to ask on their behalf.
That's a great point. And
so that shifted it immensely, but it was only through fully recognizing what in my case was my biggest weakness.
There's so many business parallels with that you can do if you're doing stuff for your members, if you're doing stuff for your users, thinking about the ask that you make for them.
Totally.
A lot of you talk.
Actually, can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
How many people here feel like they have one or two really big emails that you're supposed to send out that are going to kind of really move the needle for whatever your workload entails that you've been putting off for a couple days? So that's the case in point. I mean, I have it too. I know the exact emails, and yet we fear sending those emails because there's consequence to them, good or bad. And so you end up throughout your day sending these 30 or 40 or 500 small emails that are like little wins because they make you feel good, you know? And you don't have to face the terror of, oh my gosh, I could fail really big here, but if it works, it would be great. But I'd almost rather just keep going with the, the positive momentum. And I think that my experience with asking for money was that just on a macro scale. But the important thing is on a micro scale, every one of us experiences that every single day. And if somebody takes away from this book or this story just the simple idea that you should start every single day knowing what that big responsibility is, and if you do it first, then the whole rest of your day you're like, I did it. I did this big, difficult thing. That it's that kind of vulnerability that's important to embrace.
Yeah. Well, you're out there saving the world, and we're just working on our OKRs. We're going to open this up to questions in a few minutes. If you have some, there are microphones over here. There is one microphone over here. So if you want to start lining up. You do so much individually. Even when you give speeches, a lot of what you are doing is trying to connect with one person in the room and tell a story that they will relate to. But you've also had success at kind of a mass level, and we've got to talk about Justin Bieber here. Yeah. Justin was a massive backer of Pencils of Promise early on. He also was someone that you've traveled with. You went on vacation. He went on vacation with your family, I should say. Yeah. And your brother, Scooter Braun, represented him.
Still does.
Represents him.
Yeah.
first of all, what was he like as a kid? You know, was he the same as he is now?
You know, there's moments when we're together now where I'm like, oh my God, this is the same exact kid that walked into my apartment when he was, I don't know, 13 or 14 with this huge oversized guitar and was like, hey, can I play you songs? There's that same like kind of amazing excitement and also at the same time like naivete about the world that I think has helped him, you know, rise to the place that he's in. But traveling, spending quality time with him, he's a good person who's been put in this enormous spotlight, and I think has had to play out the difficult years that we all went through in a very public forum.
Very public. Well, I didn't mean to go down that road, but talk about the role of using an influencer, of having someone who does have some massive voice, and of getting them to be the voice of your organization. Pros, cons, how did it work for you?
So, I mean, we were one of the first organizations that kind of skyrocketed in social media growth, and as part of that had a fair amount of digital supporters and celebrities that became very closely affiliated with us. Justin being one of them, Sophia Bush being another. And what I've found is that if you have a really great core message and you try and take it to a celebrity and say, like, we have this campaign, can you participate in it? If they're not authentically connected to the work itself, then it's very superficial and the impact is very superficial. But if you find something and are able to connect with somebody, whether they're a celebrity or not, and it becomes a meaningful part of their life, and they have the additional huge platform that a Justin or a Sophia or some of the others have, then it can be super, super powerful. But it has to resonate with them. It has to be important with them. And in the case of Justin, he liked early on that we were an organization committed to empowering young people to empower other young people internationally. That spoke to him. With Sophia, she had just finished One Tree Hill, and for the first time in 9 years was able to travel. And the first trip that she did was coming with me for 10 days into the backwaters of Laos. And so she knows, I mean, she's been to Guatemala, you know, with myself and others. She has a Pencils of Promise email account, so that when she goes into companies and she has to register an email, she lists her at pencilsofpromise.org email account. So what I found is that if you're doing great work, again, you don't have to win over the room, you just have to win over one person in every room. And if that person happens to be a celebrity and you're trying to engage them in a meaningful way, they have to really deeply care about the organization itself and then give them opportunities to share their own unique story. So Sophia, 2 years ago, donated her birthday. She wanted to raise around 30 grand. She doubled it. She raised more than 60 grand within a matter of weeks. And so we time and time look for people that come to us, you know, there's a very, very famous person that just read the book and randomly reached out to me and just said, I want to be involved in what you're doing. And it wasn't us going through an agency and saying, how do we connect with you? It was a real authentic desire to be a part of the mission. And I think that that's the way that any company, for-profit or non-profit, should look to leverage or engage in partnership with celebrities. Do
you worry about their brand overshadowing, or of your brand being so closely tied with their brand?
Yeah, so with Justin, when he started to get involved in our work in 2010, you know, this is like at the peak of the kind of Bieber mania. So everyone's like, oh my gosh, make this like Bono and One. You know, it should be his organization. Same way Bono and One, it's like seen as Bono's work. And to the point that I made, I don't know, 15 minutes ago, Pencils of Promise has always been about much, much more than any one individual. And that doesn't just apply to myself and big donors, that applies to any celebrity ambassador or supporter in that vein. And so everyone who works at the organization knows we all pushed back on that heavily and said, this is a standalone entity. Justin, Sophia, on down the line, Usher, some of the others that have been involved, they support us because of what we do. And if we can create unique campaigns that highlight them, sure, that is a wonderful thing, and we've done it with some really effective campaigns that have celebrity ambassadors associated with them. But we're not owned or run by any celeb, and the organization will always continue to, I think, thrive because the people that get excited about it, they come, they intersect, they join what we do. Hopefully that's for an extended period of time, but in my view, Pencil Promise always lives outside of any one individual.
Well, it sounds like what you're talking about is a core principle, understanding your core values and your donors and your celebrities. They don't move that core.
Yeah, I mean, if people look in the history of Habitat for Humanity, most people aren't aware of this, but Jimmy Carter made Habitat for Humanity what it is in terms of putting it on a global presence. He was like this enormous ambassador, went to every single place. But whatever, 30, 40 years down the line, Habitat for Humanity stands on its own. It's not known as the Jimmy Carter Organization. And I think that he and their leadership team was very savvy in making sure that there was a separation, but one that allowed for collaborative partnership.
That's interesting. All right, we have one question over here. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Joe. I'm an intern here. How do you see technology affecting your vision? And at what point do you kind of see maybe what I want most in the world is a pencil changing to what I want most in the world is a computer? And what are you kind of doing to work towards that?
Yeah, great question. So technology plays a huge, huge role for us. I mean, it's one of the ways that we differentiate ourselves in a very crowded space, initially through anticipating a rise of digital and social media. Also, I was going to share this before, I just thought of it while sitting here. LinkedIn has indirectly built multiple Pencils of Promise schools.
Go on.
So I'm one of those people that has difficulty not, I don't know, like acknowledging messages that come in through social media, even if they sometimes are kind of spammy. And I got this completely random message from a woman, I think originally she was in Chicago or Wisconsin or something. She's like, I work in this industry, it has nothing to do with what we do, and I'm really interested in your work with Pencils of Promise, would love to chat. And it was like 7 p.m. maybe, and I was in the office about to leave, and she had listed her phone number. And every so often I really like to call just small supporters. Like a kid who's given $25, or I'll like make a video and send them a video. And so I just called this woman. I said, my name's Braun. You just sent me a message on LinkedIn. I would love to chat with you about our work. And within 3 days, completely unexpected, she sent us $20,000.
Wow.
And last year, when we organized a match day on December 30th, every dollar that you give will get matched by supporter X. We reached out to her, and she gave us $25,000 last year. And that led to this enormous spike in donations that one day. And so off of a completely random LinkedIn message, the work that you guys do has built now multiple Pencils.
That's great. In-mails work. All right.
So for context, it cost us $25,000 to build the school. That's why we get that. So I think that the time is coming very, very soon when kids will not request pencils, but they'll request a tablet or they'll request something. But the power in the request for a pencil was, it's a symbol, right? I mean, he was asking for an opportunity to self-educate. And whatever tool enables that most in the future, I hope kids ask for. What we've done with our innovation pilots now, I mean, I could, again, explain it for a long time, but if you go on YouTube and you look up Sugata Mitra, the TED Prize winner, and either my name or the name of the organization, you'll see a 3-part series that highlights this idea of us bringing tablets and connecting kids that live in mud huts in rural Ghana to the internet and reinventing what the classroom can look like so that the teacher isn't expected to be the content expert. A teacher will never know anywhere, nor will any of us, anywhere close to the amount of data and content that the internet's going to provide. And Sugata had this brilliant theory that started with this hole-in-the-wall school that he created, literally just a computer in the slums of, I think, Calcutta, and recognized that kids could self-educate just with access to the internet, and then most importantly, they would actually teach each other. They would take on the role of the teacher, and that you could almost remove the teacher from the center of the equation and have teachers more so as facilitators. The challenge is this is a theory. He's not a practitioner to the same degree. That's what we do. And so Microsoft actually brought us together, provided some funding, and across this fall we're rolling out this concept of school in the cloud and self-organized learning environments in Ghana. And if it works, I hope that it not only gets expanded globally, but that eventually it'll start to impact the way that kids get educated here as well.
Thank you.
Hey Adam, thanks for being here. I think it's very inspiring, the journey that you went on. My question is, there are a number of different nonprofits that address different components of underserved communities. like Room to Read and like Charity Water, for example, that builds walls around the world. Do you guys do any collaboration with these different organizations, and if so, how do you go about doing that?
So in terms of the approach to collaboration, one of the nice things about the space is that people don't feel as competitive with one another because you're working on a common mission, and the better one does, ideally you're kind of tackling a broad problem together. So when we've done collaborations before, it's usually been around targeting specific communities and bringing in organizations that provide supportive programming to some of the needs of that community. So for example, in Guatemala, when we wanted to get into teacher training, we started with a partnership, and we asked an organization that had a great track record in teacher training to provide teacher training programs. We'll look for organizations that provide solar light, and then we'll partner them with our communities. They'll come in, they'll provide specific lighting, or oftentimes we'll look for clean water, or maybe vitamins, nutrition, feeding programs. I'm very, very close with Scott Harrison from Charity Water, as is our whole staff, and their teams are just people like both of our approach. Theirs in water, ours in education, and John Wood and their whole team at Room to Read are also good friends of ours. We don't work in the same geographies as Room to Read, but there's another organization called World Reader that's done a great job with e-readers. They're our pilot partner in Ghana. So we look for best-in-class organizations. We try and partner with them in the most meaningful way. But at the end of the day, it's about trying to provide a cohesive solution for our community. And so sometimes we work with like really small unknown NGOs that are working on targeted issues that will be complementary to our communities.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? My name's Amanda. Thanks for coming. I'm a huge fan of your organization. I was wondering if you guys were working on any programs or initiatives to help with education reform within the United States.
Yeah, so all the time people will ask, I mean, a meeting that I had this morning was with the guy who runs charter school movement saying, can we do something together? And we now see eye to eye, because I looked into it, as did a bunch of the members of our organization about 2 years ago, and what we realized was there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are being poured into domestic ed without really any measurable increase in quality,
For sure.
which is very frustrating. And when you try and break it down, the reality of why that's occurring is because you have deeply entrenched interests, and you have teachers unions that fight against labor unions, that fight against government-created programs that have a 10-year mandate to test to this amount. And I was blown away by the amount of vitriol that exists in domestic ed, because you don't see that in international education. And those entrenched interests are so clogged that they're not allowing innovation to push forward. And it's so expensive to try anything here that it's very tough to prove anything out. And so with that recognition, that's what led to us actually coming up with our innovation pilots. And so we said we're going to have 200 plus schools. Our goal is to get to 500 schools by the start of 2016, which means hopefully a few of you get involved in the organization in some capacity to help with our next set of schools. But we realized that if we could prove that something worked, and it worked cheaply, it worked efficiently, it worked scalably, in the most challenging parts of the developing world, that there's no way that if I'm a parent in New Jersey or Delaware or Ohio, that I'm not saying, how are these guys getting kids to read at this rate over there? Why aren't my kids receiving the same thing? And if you look at histories of innovation, it always starts in the fringes, in the most unexpected places. And then once it starts to get adopted and accelerate really quickly, then it kind of comes down Main Street. And so our approach now is to be really, really deliberate and focused on proving out these pilots internationally, and then elevate the not only brand, but the awareness around that quality of work. And hopefully then it will adopt domestically.
Awesome, thank you.
How's it going? My name's Harrison. Funny thing enough, that was the exact same question I had.
Okay.
So I had to come with one on the spot. But maybe now that I'm coming up with a new question, can you, thanks for answering it, by the way. If you can maybe come tell us a little bit, what kind of curriculum do you teach the kids, and what do you focus on, and kind of thing like that. So thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate the secondary question. The curriculum is actually created by the Education Ministry. We build public schools, primary schools that are part of the public system, so kids can go from, every kid in the village can attend. And while the Education Ministry creates the core curriculum as part of our teacher training program, we now layer on additional supplemental support. So because this is primary, including preschool, it tends to be really focused around 3 things: literacy, numeracy, and grade progression. But to the point earlier about understanding where you're great and where you're not, I'm not an educator, and I'm very forward about it. And so we hired in best-in-class educators, teacher trainers, and they could give you, days worth of answers if you wanted to go into the kind of granular levels. But the focus for us is literacy, numeracy, and grade progression.
Thank you so much.
I have one from the stream.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. What role do you think MOOCs, do we know that massive open online courses, would play in the future?
So everyone here is familiar with the MOOC? You guys work in technology? Okay. I saw a couple notes. So massive open online courseware, is that what MOOC stands for?
Yeah.
So it's simply the idea that you can now live cast or record the world's best professors, put it up on kind of structured environment, and have full courses taught by the world's greatest professors to large amounts of community. So you have companies like Coursera and edX that have these MOOCs where 10,000 people are taking a robotics course from a Stanford professor. And there's a tremendous amount of hype around it. When it really started to gain traction in 2012, I would say, it's like one of those buzzwords that was constantly thrown around in the education space as the next savior of education. And what people have seen is that, unfortunately, one, very few people actually finish the course. It's like less than 10% go all the way through. And then secondly, those that do finish the course are rarely those that are in poverty or actually need those skills. It's usually people that are already in those positions and they're trying to get like an incremental advantage in the marketplace. So they haven't worked out yet, but it's new. It's early stage. I think the idea, the concept behind a MOOC is going to be really, really important to the future of education, which is that you can be location agnostic in order to get great content to students, that you don't have to have the teacher standing right in front of you to get access to great content. And that's what Sugata's concept around school in the cloud and self-organized learning environments really plays upon. So my hope is that MOOCs continue to get iterated on, that we find ways for the best professors to teach the broadest audience possible with the greatest content. But I think the single most important component of what MOOCs have proven is that you can start to, one, reinvent the classroom model, and that, two, the teacher in the room does not have to be expected to be the one who knows everything, and with or without their charisma and content knowledge, a child's life and well-being is going to be dictated by it.
Thanks.
Okay, so I have 2 questions. First one, you love to travel. I also did semester at sea. So what's your favorite place that you've traveled and why?
At Laos, for me. I love Laos. We're based in the Luang Prabang province. Has anyone been to that area? Okay. So it's just special. There's just nowhere else really like it. And if you go further north, there's an area called Nong Kiao, and then if you take a boat further north from there, there's a little tiny community called Mong Noi, and it's just a series of little huts with hammocks. And then you can walk even further, and then you're like with the kind of hill tribes. Mong Noi is my favorite place.
Cool. And the second piece is, who do you see as like a mentor in your daily life? Who brings you inspiration?
I have a bunch. So first and foremost is my family. I'm really close to my family, and I know the lineage that I come from and the story of my grandparents and my parents, and so I constantly check in with them and just say, does this feel right? My dad has a great approach to ambition, and my mom has a really great approach to integrity. And I think those are 2 things that if you can stay balanced between them, you can live hopefully a good life. Professionally, I'm really close, at least in New York, with Charles Best, who founded Donors Choose, with Nancy Lublin, started Just for Success, and is now the CEO of Do Something, and Scott Harrison from Charity War. Those are probably the 3 that I gut check the most with. And Wendy Kopp, also, who founded Teach for America and runs Teach for All. She's another one. And then the last one is someone I talk about in the book, a guy named Ray Chambers, who's probably changed more lives than anyone else that I've ever met, and will do more good in this world than I can ever hope to touch. But he fortunately joined our board of directors and our advisory board, and it was just someone who changed my thinking a lot.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Adam, question for you. We talked about some of these great organizations out there, some of your inspirations. How do you decide starting your own organization versus working with one that's already doing good work around the world? How do you kind of, for people in the room thinking about this, how do you process that?
I mean, when I became really passionate about this work, I immediately found an organization that I believed in and a leadership team that I trusted, which was the Cambodian Children's Fund, a guy named Scott Neeson. And I spent 4 years of my life just doing anything that I could to support the well-being of that organization. So I don't encourage people, if you get excited about something, to start something. You end up dealing with so much, one, just administrative kind of headache and clogs. I mean, the amount of just paperwork, or I had to go find a pro bono lawyer who would help me after hours from my regular job to get our 501c3 regulation. It's brutal, and you don't want to take that on. You want to usually kind of focus on mission. So I always encourage people, find an organization, and ideally one that has leadership, either individual or ideally team, that you deeply believe in, and they will find ways, if you're persistent, for you to get involved. All the time, people reach out to us like, how can I get involved? And we have a beautiful website, and if you go on our website, it says take action, and there's a get started, and there's a whole bunch of ways. We have leadership councils. People donate their birthdays, they come up with creative fundraisers. 30,000+ people have used the digital platform that we built to create unique fundraisers, and it's unbelievable what they're able to do. But the expectation that you're going to be able to be impactful without getting turned down pretty frequently is unreasonable. And so I try and share with people, first, find an organization you believe in, and like be the most annoying person in the world to them. Just don't stop bothering them with the fact that you want to find ways to contribute, and eventually they're going to find ways for you to get involved. And then if over time you feel like the learnings that you've derived from that work lead you to a place where you want to work on a very specific niche issue that another organization is not addressing to the full potential that you believe it should be, then you should entertain starting something. But I spent 4 years with another organization and only started something because I couldn't find another NGO that was doing sustainable quality work while also communicating that transparently through digital and social media. And there was like a breakdown in the industry, and that's when it got started.
Great, thanks.
So this is going to be the last question.
Hi, Adam. Thanks so much for coming in. I'm Ellen. My question is sort of an extension of his question, which is, raising awareness and fundraising, of course, are probably the easiest ways that we can help. But what are some of the less obvious ways, or some of the things, specifically initiatives that are happening right now that are of particular importance?
So one of the things that we do a lot is full employee engagement campaigns with companies. There's a lot of companies out there that have a sales-driven force, and yet their employees oftentimes say, all right, I'm motivated to sell, but if I could tie this to some positive social outcome, it would motivate me even more. And so all the time, Melanie and Natalie will work with companies that say, we would love to, one, build a school, two, galvanize and motivate our employees around our work, but one that at the same time contributes to global well-being. And then three, everybody more than anything wants to go on the ground and experience what happens when you're in these environments, and maybe help build a school or attend an opening ceremony. So we work with a lot of companies to create these full campaigns that usually lead to like intra-team competition, and oftentimes the leading whatever salesperson or whatever the metric is, they get invited on a trip and they go with a senior leader in the company, which is really cool for them. So that's one thing that we do that I don't think many of the organizations really think about even doing, let alone have the opportunity to. We also do a lot of cause marketing campaigns tied around our graduation campaign, our back to school, and our end of year campaign. And I mean, the third one now is actually the book. I mean, people that just gift the book to somebody else. We've just seen incredible results. There was he just graduated, maybe he's 23, he's been working for a year, who sent me a LinkedIn message. Right. Oh, LinkedIn's been so many schools now. This kid sent me this message. I read your book, I was really moved by it. I'd like to introduce you to this mentor of mine. He's on the board of another organization, and it's in a different space. And I was like, look, we're not going to partner with that organization, so in the interest of your time and mine, I appreciate it, but I don't think I can meet with this guy. And he was like, no, he wants to get involved philanthropically. And off of a series of meetings, this individual has now built, I don't want to ruin donor confidentiality, but more than a lot of schools. And that started with one kid reading the book, gifting it to this guy, so that by the time myself and one of my colleagues who works in development went into me with it, I couldn't explain to this guy what we did, because he knew more about me than I realized most people have ever known about me. He's like, oh yeah, that story and that story and that story. I want to be a part of this. And so that's kind of a unique third way, is just, and you guys were kind enough to gift the book to everyone here. So once you read it, feel free to gift it on to somebody else that you think it'll resonate with. And all proceeds from the book go into Pencils of Promise as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Adam. This has been such an inspiring talk. I feel like there are a couple key takeaways. One is the one you just talked about, which is this idea of you don't have to talk, you don't have to connect with everyone in the room, you just have to connect with one person in the room.
Yeah, one of you will get very involved in Pencils of Promise.
Yes.
But just one.
Just one. But the idea of reaching the individual and of making them passionate on their own, and how that passion carries. The idea of the heart and head combination, making sure that you are true to certain metrics and watching the data, but also thinking about, listening to your heart. And then finding the soul of your organization, making sure that it continues on without you, understanding what it is so that you can make tough decisions. And I think that we've all learned a ton, and I'm sure a lot of people want to get involved. And you're going to stick around and sign books afterwards?
Absolutely.
That's terrific. So thank you very much. Another round of applause for Adam.